Hey friends, today I'm going to talk a little bit about my design process when I'm working on knitted designs, and I'm going to use this sweater vest that I'm working on as kind of an example and show you what my thought process is and how I design it kind of from the ground up. Also, we're going to be taking some measurements, so we're going to get a little bit intimate. So if you don't want to see me with the shirt on, go ahead and scroll on by. So one of the first things that's really helpful is if you have a basic drawing of what it is that you'd like to do. So let me show you on this what I'm doing with it. So this is my sweater vest, and I want it to be tapered up from the waist up to under the arm, and then it's going to come up kind of like a tank, and it's all going to be knit in the round. And so I'm creating a steek up the middle, and I want to have some cables on the side that actually go up through the neck. And there's a couple places we're going to measure. We're going to measure right here at the waist. We're going to measure here at below the ribs. We're going to measure just a little bit higher. And then we're going to measure right at the chest area or the underarm area so that we can make sure that we have good measurements, because I want this to be somewhat form-fitted and I want it to taper into a V so that it fits my body. So let's go ahead and do these measurements. Real quickly, one other thing you're going to want is you're going to want to have your gauge. So whatever pattern you're going to be knitting in, you want to make sure that you have your gauge. So however many stitches per inch and how many stitches per row. In my case, this is 7 stitches per inch. Okay, and I roughly have 9 rows per inch. Okay, so the 7 stitches per inch is this way, and the 9 rows per inch is this way. All right, here we go. We're going to do the measurements. So you're going to want to have like some sort of a fabric soft tape measure like so. And this one is just a little simple retractable one that I got from Tangled Pearls, which was an LYS local yarn store back in Montana. And I've had this for years. Works really, really well. So let's get to some measurements. Okay, so first things first, we want to measure around the waist. And when I say waist, I mean where you want the bottom of your garment to be. So I'm going to measure it right here at typically where my belt line is. And if we look, we're at 32 inches. So right there, 32 inches. Now, you may want to measure in centimeters. It's a little bit more accurate, but for our purposes right now, centimeters is going to work just fine. So there's our first measurement. We'll have that written down. Our second measurement, where we want a little bit more of a taper, is I am going to come up to just below my ribs. This is where one of our first increases is going to happen. So if I go just at the very bottom of my ribs, we're at about 32 1/4. Okay, so I can actually go just a little bit higher, right at the bottom of my rib cage. Let's measure in here. Now we're at 34. So if you take a breath, nice big breath, then measure. I'm sitting at about 34 3/4. Now, with the way that knitting stretches, I want it to be pretty accurate to that measurement because I want it to be form-fitted, and knitting will also stretch just a little bit as you breathe. If you want more ease, you're going to have to add more stitches. So let's do another measurement here. We're going to go up just a little bit higher and measure right underneath the chest, right under the pectoral. And that measurement right there, if I take a deep breath, is 37 inches. You see what's happening? It's creating the V as we go up. And then I'm going to measure around my chest and across my shoulder blades, under my arms, where I want the last of those stitches to go, which is going to be the last round before I separate everything. And we're going to take a breath and then relax. And we're going to take a look at that measurement. And that measurement is right at about 40 inches. Okay. So we have all of those measurements. Now what we want to do is we want to measure up front from those marks. So I'm going to start here at my belt line, and we're going to measure up to where I took my first measurement. So from the base to here is 6 inches. The next measurement was taken at 9.5 inches, and the final measurement was taken at 11 inches. So now we know how much space we have to do all of those increases in. I'm going to put my shirt back on so that we can get back to business. Okay, so I have all of those measurements written down right down here in my notes, and we're going to do a little bit of math. So we're starting out at 32 inches. So 32 inches times 7, let's pull out the handy dandy calculator. 32 times 7 equals 224. Okay, so that is the number of stitches that I want to start with. Now, we know that it's at 32 inches to begin. So 224 stitches. Now, on the first increase that I wanted to do, we wanted to go up to 33 inches. So normally you would add 7 stitches. So you would go from 224 to, what is that, 231. But I want to keep even numbers because of the rounds and because I'm going to be splitting it, and so it has to be equal on both sides. I'm going to add 8 stitches, and so we're going to go up to 232. Then again, we want to go up to 30, I'm going up to 34.5 inches on this particular measurement. And so from the 8 stitches, we need to increase another 12 stitches because we're increasing by 1.5 inches. So 7 times 2 equals 14. We take about 3/4 of that, and that's going to be, I called it 12. You could probably do 10. Then again, at 10 inches up, we're going to go to 37.5 inches. So I need to increase by 3 inches. And so I said here, I'm going to go up to 24 stitches just because I want the little bit of extra ease as we get higher up into the chest area. But 3 times 7 would normally be 21. Again, you want to have that equal number on both sides, especially if you're going to split your work. And then the final measurement that I have is at 13.5 inches, right below the chest, or right on the pectoral area, right underneath the arm. And we're going to 40.5 stitches at that point, so I have to increase another 24 stitches. Okay, so back to the iPad. Now I've got my measurement points. I actually did 5 of them for this particular project. So I'm going to start with 224, and I'm only going to do the ribbing with that amount of stitches. And then I'm going to increase in just a small space right there to 232 stitches. Then I'll increase up to 244 stitches at this point. Then I'll increase to 268. And by the time I get ready to split all the sides off of my work, I'm going to have 292 stitches. And so what we want to do over these particular sections like this, we want to increase them in sections. We don't want to just jump right up and all of a sudden increase these stitches all the way around, because we want it to have a gradual taper. And so what I do is I do my increases about every 6 rows on either side of the garment. I do about 6 rows, and I'll do an increase on either side of my stitch marker. So I'll do 2 on this side, 2 on this side. So every 6th row, I'm adding about 4 stitches in. That'll give a nice taper up the garment. So the other thing that's happening here is that because I have cables in the front of this, and I'm going to be installing a zipper along this steek right here, number one, the cables are going to draw this fabric in somewhere between 1.5 inches. So I figured on about 1/2 inch of draw. And then when I add my zipper, that's going to give me back about another 1/4 inch right down the middle. So I've also calculated in, so I want to be right exactly at my 32 inches because of the stretch of the fabric, number one, and number two, because I'm also putting in cables and I'm putting in a zipper. So as I'm designing and knitting, I don't do all my measurements right away because I don't typically tend to write my patterns and then knit. I typically tend to start knitting and then I adjust my pattern as I go. Sometimes I'll make some notes, but oftentimes I'll wait until I'm actually finished before I start completely writing the pattern if it's one that I'm going to make for sale. But there's some other measurements that we're going to want. We're going to need to know how far here underneath the arm I need to cast off stitches. So I'll need to know how many stitches I'll need to cast off on both sides when I get ready to split the work out of the tube. The other dimension that we want to know is we want to know from the center point here to the edge of the armhole, because this is going to split right here, and then we're going to start decreasing about every other row up this particular side so that we get that nice angled taper. We want to know how far it's going to be from this point under the arm up to the top of the shoulder. You don't have to measure this way, you can just measure straight up and down if you like. We also want to know how far across the back of the neck we want this to be, and we need to know how wide we want the sleeves. Now, because there's also going to be cables running around the edges of the armholes, and there's going to be a cable running around the neck, so that's coming up, and then the cables will split and go around the neck, and then it will rejoin at the back so that it goes across the back as well. We want to know how many inches we're going to be left with. We have to figure that in, and then we have to make sure that when we end all of these pieces that we've got enough stitches that they'll line up so that we can cast them off together, or you can go back through and do Kitchener stitch, or you could just whip stitch it together. You could cast off and whip stitch it if you like. Me in particular, I'm going to do a cast off edge along that to join. So I would say that the most important thing in all of this is just to make sure that while you're doing this, take your measurements, do your gauge swatch, because that is really, really important, because you have to have a good gauge swatch in order to calculate your measurements properly. And just have fun. Design from the ground up. Remember, it's only fabric. If you make a mistake, and if you make something a little bit too big or a little bit too small, you can always tear it out and you can go back and pick up those stitches and you can start back again and rebuild your garment. But have fun, enjoy, and I hope that maybe I've given you a little bit of insight into my design process. Have a great day.